The fire started on the third floor, and within minutes, smoke was filling the hallways. Families trapped above were screaming for help. But while everyone else panicked, the quiet building superintendent moved with the precision of someone who had rescued people from far worse places. When the firefighters arrived, they found him carrying the last child to safety and recognized the tactical vest he wore beneath his maintenance uniform. This is the kind of story they don't teach in history books. Before we dive into this tale of hidden heroes and forgotten legends, tell me in the comments, from which city are you watching today? And if you believe these untold stories deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These are the stories that matter, the ones that remind us that heroes walk among us every single day, invisible until someone finally sees them. Riverside Apartments stood 12 stories tall on the east side of downtown, a brick and concrete monument to 1960s urban planning. Home to 180 families, it housed teachers, shop workers, retirees, and young couples just starting their lives together. The building had good bones but showed its age in creaking elevators, temperamental heating, and hallway carpets that had seen better decades. The man who kept it running was someone most residents barely noticed. Frank Castellano had been the building superintendent for 8 years, living in a basement apartment that came with the job. He fixed leaky pipes, replaced burnt-out bulbs, painted over graffiti, and handled the 1,000 small problems that kept a 40-year-old building habitable. At 6 to 4, Frank moved with the careful economy of someone who had learned to conserve energy for when it was truly needed. He wore the same type of work clothes every day: dark blue coveralls, steel-toed boots, and a canvas tool belt that contained everything necessary to handle routine maintenance emergencies. Most residents knew him only as the guy who showed up when something was broken. Polite but not chatty, efficient but not rushed, present but somehow invisible. He had that quality that maintenance workers develop, the ability to move through people's lives without leaving much impression beyond the problems he solved. Frank's basement workshop was a testament to organized efficiency. Tools hung in precise arrangements on pegboard walls. Parts bins were labeled and sorted by size and function. Workbenches were clean, equipment was maintained, and everything had its designated place. But tucked behind the water heater, in a locked cabinet that no resident had ever seen opened, Frank kept equipment that had nothing to do with apartment maintenance. Tactical gear that hadn't been standard issue for 30 years, but remained functional, cleaned, and ready for deployment. Because Frank Castellano hadn't always been a building superintendent. From 1978 to 1998, he had been Sergeant First Class Francisco Castellano, 75th Ranger Regiment, specializing in urban combat operations and high-risk personnel extraction. 20 years of jumping into hostile territory, clearing buildings floor by floor, and bringing people home from places where conventional rescue operations couldn't operate. Mogadishu, Panama, Kuwait, classified operations in countries whose names couldn't be spoken. Frank had seen more burning buildings, trapped civilians, and impossible rescue scenarios than most firefighters encounter in entire careers. But that was before retirement, before civilian life, before choosing to fix pipes instead of clearing rooms, to solve maintenance problems instead of tactical problems, to live quietly among people who didn't need to know what he had done in service of missions they would never hear about. On this Tuesday evening at 6:23 p.m., Frank was replacing a broken outlet in the laundry room when the smoke alarm on the third floor began its piercing shriek. He dropped his tools immediately and ran toward the stairwell, his mind shifting automatically into emergency protocols he hadn't used in 27 years but had never forgotten. The smell hit him before he reached the third floor. Electrical fire, synthetic materials burning, the acrid smoke that indicated a situation escalating beyond simple containment. Unit 3C, the Morrison family. 2 parents, 3 children ages 4 to 12. Frank had fixed their garbage disposal last month, knew their apartment layout, understood their escape routes and vulnerabilities. The hallway was already filling with smoke. Residents from neighboring units were evacuating in panic, some in pajamas, some carrying laptops and photo albums, all moving toward the main stairwell with the instinctive crowd behavior that could turn deadly if the situation deteriorated. Frank pushed against the flow of evacuees, moving toward the source of the fire rather than away from it. His mind was calculating variables he hadn't needed to consider for decades: structural integrity, smoke density, potential collapse zones, extraction routes that bypass conventional exits. Through the chaos, he heard what made his blood turn cold. Children crying from an upper-floor Unit 8B, the Chen family. Young parents, twin girls aged 5, baby boy not yet walking. Their apartment was directly above the fire's origin point, and the main stairwell was already compromised by smoke that would incapacitate small lungs within minutes. Frank looked up the stairwell and saw smoke pouring down from the 8th floor like a gray waterfall. The elevator was automatically disabled during fire emergencies. The main staircase was becoming a chimney that would kill anyone who tried to climb through it. But Frank knew something about buildings that most people didn't understand. Every structure had secondary routes, service passages, emergency systems that weren't visible to casual observation. And every rescue operation had alternatives that weren't taught in civilian emergency procedures. Study ran back to his basement workshop, unlocked the cabinet behind the water heater, and grabbed equipment he had hoped never to use again: tactical harness, rappelling rope rated for 300 pounds, emergency oxygen masks, first aid kit designed for combat trauma, and a device that looked like a small black box but was actually a thermal imaging scanner that could locate human heat signatures through smoke and debris. Frank strapped on the gear with muscle memory that transcended the 27 years since he'd last worn it professionally. The harness felt familiar despite the decades, the weight distribution exactly as he remembered, the equipment responding to his movements like extensions of his own body. He took the service elevator to the roof, bypassed the main stairwell entirely, and began a descent that most people would have considered suicide, but which Frank approached as just another Tuesday night rescue operation in a career that had been built on extracting people from impossible situations, the thermal scanner showed him what he needed to know: 8 heat signatures on the 8th floor, clustered in Unit 8B, separated from escape routes by a corridor filled with smoke that would incapacitate adults within minutes and children within seconds. Frank rappelled down the outside of the building to the 8th floor window, used a glass-cutting tool from his kit to create an entry point that bypassed the smoke-filled interior hallway, and entered the Chen apartment through the living room window. Inside, he found chaos. The parents, David and Maria Chen, were trying to seal the door gaps with wet towels while their 3 children huddled in the bedroom farthest from the hallway. Smoke was seeping under the door despite their efforts, and the apartment was rapidly becoming uninhabitable. "Everyone stay calm," Frank announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to taking command during emergencies. "I'm here to get you out." David Chen stared at the man who had just appeared through their window wearing tactical gear that belonged in military operations, not apartment building maintenance. "Frank?" Maria asked, recognizing their superintendent despite the equipment that transformed him from maintenance worker into something else entirely. Frank replied, already moving toward the children. "We need to move quickly and quietly. I'm going to get everyone to safety, but I need you to follow my instructions exactly." Frank assessed the family's condition rapidly. 3 children, ages 5, and 18 months. 2 adults, capable of following directions but panicked by circumstances beyond their normal experience. None injured, all conscious, but exposure to smoke was increasing every second they remained in the apartment. The extraction would require 3 trips. Frank could safely carry 2 children at once using the harness system, but the baby would need individual attention, and the parents would need to rappel independently under his guidance. "David," Frank said, addressing the father while preparing the first rigging. "You're coming with me on the first trip with the twins. Maria, you'll follow with the baby on the second trip. I'm going to teach you to rappel in the next 60 seconds. "I can't," Maria whispered, looking at the window that Frank had opened to reveal an 8-story drop to the street below. Frank looked her in the eye with the calm certainty of someone who had talked people through impossible decisions when their lives depended on overcoming fear. He said quietly, "I've done this 127 times in conditions much worse than this. You're going to trust me, follow my instructions, and get your family to safety. We don't have time for fear." The first extraction took 4 minutes. Frank rigged David and the twin girls into the harness system, then guided them down the building's exterior wall with the controlled descent of someone who had practiced such operations until they became automatic responses rather than conscious decisions. Street level was chaos. Fire trucks, ambulances, police cars, and a crowd of evacuated residents watching their home burn from the safety of the parking lot across the street. But Frank had positioned his operation away from the main rescue efforts, using the building's corner where emergency personnel wouldn't interfere with his unconventional methodology. As Frank secured the first group and prepared for the second extraction, Fire Chief Robert Martinez noticed something that made him step away from his incident command position to get a closer look. The man coordinating the rescue wasn't wearing firefighter gear. His equipment was tactical, military-grade, designed for operations that had nothing to do with civilian emergency response. More importantly, his movements demonstrated training that exceeded anything taught in fire academies. Martinez was a 20-year veteran of emergency response who had worked with search and rescue teams across multiple agencies. He recognized military precision when he saw it, understood the difference between civilian training and combat experience. As Frank began his ascent for the second extraction, Martinez positioned himself to observe the operation more closely. What he saw confirmed his suspicions. This wasn't improvised heroism or lucky civilian intervention. This was a professional rescue operation conducted by someone who had clearly done this type of work before, extensively and expertly. The second extraction involved Maria Chen and her 18-month-old son. Frank had modified the harness to create a secure carrier for the baby, while rigging Maria into a controlled descent system that would allow her to reach ground level safely despite having no rappelling experience. "Mrs. Chen," Frank said as he prepared the equipment, "I'm going to control your descent completely. All you need to do is keep your body straight and trust the system. Don't look down. Don't try to help. Just let the equipment do the work." Maria was crying but nodding, her maternal instinct to save a child overriding her terror of heights. Frank secured the baby against his chest using a carrier that was clearly designed for tactical operations rather than civilian rescue work. The descent took 6 minutes, with Frank managing both his own weight and Maria's while ensuring the baby remained secure and protected from smoke exposure. When they reached ground level, Martinez was waiting with questions that went beyond normal incident reporting. "Sir," the fire chief said as Frank unrigged the harness system, "that equipment isn't standard civilian gear. Neither are those techniques." Frank handed the baby to Maria and began coiling rope with movements that were automatic after decades of practice. "Equipment gets the job done, Chief. That's all that matters. Where did you learn to do that?" Martinez pressed. Frank looked up at the building, checking for additional heat signatures that might indicate other trapped residents. "Here and there. Different places, different times." Martinez studied Frank's face, noting details that suggested military service. The haircut that hadn't changed style in decades. The posture that remained straight despite age and exertion. The way his eyes continuously scanned for threats and opportunities even while conducting rescue operations. "You mind if I ask what unit you served with?" Frank finished coiling the rope and looked Martinez directly in the eye. "I minded when people asked 30 years ago. I mind less now that civilians are safe." He began walking toward the building entrance, where the main fire was still being contained by the arriving fire department. Martinez followed, recognizing that this conversation was far from over. "Sir, the way you moved through that building, the equipment you used, the techniques, that's not something you learn in weekend rescue courses." Frank paused at the building entrance, where smoke was still pouring from broken windows, but the immediate threat to trapped residents had been eliminated. "Chief," he said quietly, "there are skills you learn once and carry forever. Today seemed like a good day to remember them." As Frank disappeared into the building to assist with interior operations, Martinez radioed his dispatcher with a request that surprised everyone monitoring emergency frequencies. "Command, this is Martinez at the Riverside Fire. I need federal liaison contact for military personnel inquiry. We have a civilian here with tactical training that exceeds normal parameters." The response came back within minutes. "Martinez, are you requesting federal backup for a fire incident?" "Negative, Command. I'm requesting background verification for someone who just conducted a professional rescue operation using equipment and techniques that suggest specialized military training." 2 hours later, as the fire was being extinguished and residents were being relocated to temporary housing, Frank was completing his final sweep of the building's lower floors when Martinez approached him with information that changed the entire context of the evening's events. "Frank Castellano," Martinez said, reading from notes he'd received through channels that bypassed normal emergency response protocols. "Age 64. Building superintendent for 8 years. Before that, 20 years with the 75th Ranger Regiment. Specialist in urban combat operations and high-risk personnel extraction." Frank set down his equipment and looked at Martinez with resignation rather than surprise. "Chief, there are reasons people retire to civilian jobs. Sometimes it's because they're tired of being who they used to be. According to federal records," Martinez continued, "you participated in 17 classified rescue operations between 1985 and 1998. Mogadishu, Panama, Kuwait, and several locations that remain redacted. Perfect success rate for personnel extraction under hostile conditions." Frank began walking toward his basement workshop, signaling that the conversation was over. But Martinez wasn't finished. "Frank, what you did tonight, that wasn't retirement. That was muscle memory. You saved 5 people using skills that most rescue professionals train their entire careers to develop." Frank stopped at the workshop door and turned back. "Chief, I fix pipes now. Change light bulbs. Handle noise complaints. That's my job. But tonight, people needed help. I helped them. Tomorrow, Mrs. Rodriguez on the 4th floor will need her garbage disposal fixed. And I'll help her too. Different problems, same job." Martinez studied Frank's face, seeing something in his expression that spoke of decisions made and boundaries established long before this conversation. "The equipment you used," Martinez said, "it's not standard maintenance gear." Frank unlocked his workshop door. "Chief, a smart man keeps tools he hopes he'll never need again. Tonight, I needed them." As Frank disappeared into his workshop, Martinez understood that he had encountered something rare in emergency response. A professional who had chosen anonymity over recognition, civilian service over military glory, and the quiet satisfaction of fixing small problems over the adrenaline of solving large ones. But Frank's military training had revealed itself when circumstances demanded capabilities that transcended normal civilian resources. And now Martinez faced a decision about whether to report what he had observed or respect the choice of a man who had clearly earned the right to live peacefully among people who didn't need to know what he had done before becoming their superintendent. The next morning, Frank resumed his normal routine, checking boiler pressure, responding to maintenance requests, painting over smoke damage in the stairwells. The only difference was that residents looked at him differently now, not with curiosity or fear, but with the kind of respect that comes from seeing someone reveal capabilities that exceed all expectations. Misses. Chen stopped him in the lobby 3 days after the fire. "Mr. Castellano," she said, holding her baby son, "we owe you our lives." Frank was carrying a toolbox and wearing his usual coveralls, looking exactly as he had every day for 8 years. "I was just doing my job." "Your job is maintenance," she said. "What you did was something else entirely." Frank set down his toolbox and looked at the baby boy who was sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms. Alive because sometimes the right person is in the right place when circumstances demand capabilities that exceed normal human resources. "Mrs. Chen," he said quietly, "there are lots of ways to serve people. Some are more visible than others." She nodded, understanding that she had been given all the explanation she was going to receive. 2 weeks later, Fire Chief Martinez received a call from federal officials requesting a meeting about the Riverside fire incident. The meeting took place in Martinez's office with 2 men who introduced themselves only by first names and showed credentials that suggested involvement with agencies that operated beyond normal civilian oversight. "Chief Martinez," the older official said, "we understand you encountered an individual during the recent fire who demonstrated unusual capabilities." Martinez had been expecting this conversation. "Frank Castellano. Your records probably know more about him than I do. Mr. Castellano has chosen civilian life after military service," the second official said. "That choice is supported by federal policy that protects the privacy of certain veterans whose service involved classified operations." Martinez leaned back in his chair. "Are you asking me not to report what I observed? We are asking you to consider that some people have earned the right to live quietly among civilians who benefit from their presence without needing to understand their capabilities." The older official placed a business card on Martinez's desk. "If Mr. Castellano ever needs assistance, or if his situation changes in ways that compromise his safety or privacy, this number connects to resources that can provide appropriate support." After the officials left, Martinez sat alone in his office, thinking about Frank's rescue operation and the conversation that had just concluded. He understood that he had encountered something that existed at the intersection of military service and civilian protection, where former operators chose to remain available for emergencies while maintaining anonymity among the people they had committed to serving. Frank continued his routine at Riverside Apartments, fixing problems, maintaining equipment, solving the 1,000 small issues that kept the community functioning. But residents noticed differences that hadn't been visible before the fire: the way he moved through the building, always aware of exits and sightlines; the questions he asked during routine maintenance visits, subtly assessing family sizes and daily routines in ways that suggested concern for security rather than curiosity; the modifications he made to building systems, additional smoke detectors, improved stairwell lighting, emergency supply caches that he installed without explanation or fanfare. 6 months after the fire, a new family moved into Unit 7A. Young couple, 2 small children, relocating from across the country for a job opportunity. During their first week, the husband approached Frank with routine maintenance requests and casual conversation. "Mr. Castellano," he said, "the neighbors mentioned you're the guy who saved those families during the fire. That was incredible." Frank was replacing a faucet washer and didn't look up from his work. "The fire department saved them. I just helped with logistics. But they said you went up the outside of the building, used special equipment, like you were some kind of special forces guy." Frank tightened the faucet connection and tested the water pressure. "Fixed," he said, gathering his tools. "Should work fine now." As he walked toward the door, the man persisted. "Were you really in special forces?" Frank paused at the threshold, considering how to respond to curiosity that wouldn't be satisfied with deflection. "Sir," he said finally, "there are people who serve in ways that get recognition, and people who serve in ways that require anonymity. Both are necessary. Both are honorable. The difference is that one ends with parades, and the other ends with maintenance jobs in apartment buildings where nobody asks too many questions. That evening, Frank sat on his basement workshop stool, drinking black coffee from a dented metal cup, surrounded by tools that served two different purposes: wrenches and screwdrivers for civilian problems, tactical gear for emergencies that required capabilities beyond normal human resources. Duddy had chosen this life deliberately. Chosen anonymity over recognition, civilian service over military glory, the quiet satisfaction of fixing small problems over the adrenaline that had defined his youth. The fire had forced him to reveal skills he had hoped to keep buried, but it had also reminded him why those skills mattered. Because sometimes being prepared for the worst-case scenario means having the capability to prevent it from becoming a tragedy. Sometimes the greatest act of service is being ready for emergencies that you hope will never occur. Frank finished his coffee, locked the tactical equipment back in its cabinet, and prepared for another day of routine maintenance in a building full of people who slept safely because someone with uncommon capabilities had chosen to remain quietly available for the emergencies that civilian training couldn't handle. The fire department's official report listed the Riverside incident as a successful multi-family rescue with 0 casualties. Frank Castellano was mentioned only as building maintenance personnel who provided assistance during evacuation procedures. No medals, no recognition, no acknowledgement of capabilities that had saved 5 lives using techniques that weren't taught in civilian emergency response courses. Just the quiet satisfaction of problems solved and people protected by someone who had earned the right to be invisible until circumstances demanded that he become visible again. Have you ever lived in a building, worked in an office, or shopped in a store where the maintenance person, the security guard, or the quiet employee in the corner might have been someone whose past prepared them for emergencies you hope never to experience? Share their story in the comments below. Tell us what city you're watching from, because some stories remind us that heroes don't always wear uniforms, and that the most important people are often the ones we notice least until we need them most. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe and help us honor the quiet service of those who remain ready to help when civilian resources aren't enough. We'll see you in the next one. And remember, the next time you pass a maintenance worker, a security guard, or any quiet employee who seems to notice details others miss, consider the possibility that their skills extend far beyond their job description. Sometimes, the people who fix small problems are prepared to solve much larger ones.